Hi, we're so glad that you could join us today. My name is John Hayes, and I'm a district peer mentor teacher for Brevard Public Schools. I'm joined today by my colleague, Bridget Reed. We are here to guide you through the basics and the requirements of lesson planning. Most of, if not all of what we present today will be in regards to dimension number one of the Instructional Personnel Performance Appraisal System, also known as IPPAS. That dimension is entitled Instructional Design and Lesson Planning. And now, here's Bridget.
Hi there, I'm Bridget Reed. Thank you for joining us. Yes, lesson plans. That's where we are. And why do we even have to do them? What makes them so impactful in a classroom? Keep this in mind because we're going to keep hammering this one home. The stronger the lesson plans, the better the classroom management, the better the impact on teaching. So there is a strong why for doing them. We're going to start with John Hattie, Invisible Learning. That's what's on your screen right now. And it's all going to tie together with the lesson plan. So just hang on. If you haven't heard of John Hattie, he's considered one of the gurus of education. And I heard him speak a few years ago when I was at a conference, and I got to train with him for a few days up in Chicago. And it all started with that little white book on the right there, Visible Learning. And basically the background to Visible Learning is that this man, John Hattie, who is not an educational theorist, he is actually has a PhD in statistics, which I find refreshing because he has taken numerous studies, meta-analysis of what impacts learning the best, put them into a number, which we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, and concentrates on strategies that really work in the classroom. That's where we're going to spend our time talking today. Let's concentrate on lesson planning and planning strategies that truly impact your students' learning instead of spending time on things that really don't work as much. We just don't have the time for that. So the visible learning, and you're going to see this in our evaluation, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit as well later on, but it's all started from John Hattie, and it's the largest collection of evidence about what really works in the classroom. So stay tuned as we keep talking about visible learning. Okay, so one of the biggest things with John Hattie's teachings with visible learning is knowing thy impact. And that is knowing what you do in the classroom and how it impacts learning. I want you to kind of think right now back on a time when you were in school, kindergarten through 12th grade. And I want you to think about a teacher or teachers that really impacted your schooling. It may not have been academically, it could have been socially, something going on that they really supported you. But I want you to think back, kindergarten through 12th grade. Picture that person, picture those people. If you have a name or names, kind of have those at the forefront. And kind of think right now, what was it that they did that did impact you? And right now, think about it. Was it just one? Was it more than one? Was it a few? Most of the time when we do this training in person where we have people in front of us, we have a lot of teachers that it's just one. And if you think about that, kindergarten through at least 5th or 6th grade, you do have one teacher, one homeroom teacher, but you also have the specials teachers. Then once you get to middle school and high school, you're rotating 7 times. So you have 7 times for 7 years, 49 teachers. When you're choosing just 1 or 2 that really impacted you, that's really where we start to think, how can we be the teacher that impacts the students in our classroom? What is it that teacher did that you can mimic to do the same for your students. The average is really pretty low in the United States. It's less than 5. Um, and one of the interesting things that comes up too is most of the time it's a first grade teacher. And we've talked about that when we've had the training in person, that maybe that's kind of a transition time where you're done with kindergarten, or that you're really into learning, you're learning to read. But just keep going back in your mind as we go through this training, and even as you go through the school year, what is it that quality that you had that really impacted you, and how can you put that forward to the students around you? So know thy impact. All right, to understand the strategies that really impact the student learning and what really works in the classroom, we have to understand an effect size. And this is what John Hattie used to take all of these different studies to put them into a common number to see what really affects the classroom. So it's simply a number that we can use to determine, yes, this strategy actually works compared to strategies that don't work. So that's what he means by effect size. The effect size we are looking at is anything that's greater than a 0.40. And this is showing that students are what they're learning over 1 year's growth of time. So that's the magic number we have to keep in mind. It's 0.40. So when we see this particular graph, we are looking to be in that blue area, that zone of desired effects. Now, very little we do actually hurts students, where you see that red graph part right there where it says reverse. Very little of what we do in the classroom actually affects that. There's certain things that do, that would be a negative. Student movement, when they're moving from school to school to school to school, that does have a negative effect. That's not something that actually goes on in the classroom, but it's important to know. And 60 to 70% of teachers work in that blue area, 0.4 and greater. So if we look at a 0.40 and a 0.80, if we look at a 0.80, if you chose a strategy that hit that number, you're looking at something that can impact students for 2 years over 1 year's worth of growth. So you really want to choose strategies that are in that blue area. We do have a lot of typical teacher effects that are in that yellow area. And so when we're doing the why we're choosing something to put in our lesson plans, let's spend the time on strategies that are in the blue. Okay, so at the top of this training, we had asked you to print out 2 of these papers, and this is the first one. I want you to take a look at this one. And what I'd like you to do at this time is I want you to go through this and mark the impacts where you believe they are as far as working with students. So let's look at ability grouping, tracking, steaming. Mark if you believe that has high impact on student learning, medium, or if it has low. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. And when you're done, you're going to move to the next screen to actually check the answers. You're not going to turn this in. This is just something that you're going to be using to gauge where impact is truly happening. I do want to go through a few of these. Acceleration, you understand what that is. It's skipping a year. Comprehension programs, it's really reading comprehension that you're working on in all the different subject areas. Concept mapping would be where graphic organizers are used. Cooperative, individualistic learning, so if they're working in groups versus by themselves. We know what direct instruction is. Feedback is from you to the students. Gender, so we know the difference between that. Home environment, jigsaw method. If you've not done cooperative learning strategies, this is a cooperative learning strategy that I would love, if you get a chance to take a little note on this, to do a quick YouTube, because I think you would get some information out of that that would help you. influence of peers, matching teaching with student learning styles, metacognitive strategy programs. That's thinking about their thinking. That's modeling out loud. What do I think about this? How would I read this paragraph to get the most out of it? What does that word mean? It's that thinking aloud and the thinking about thinking. Phonics instruction, and then professional development. So take a few minutes, and when you're done, you're going to go to the next slide. Okay, here are the answers, and just take a look at those. Were there any there that surprised you? I know a lot when we do this training in person, there are definitely some surprises there. You can see, for example, acceleration. Skipping a year, that's a 0.68. Now, this isn't something that we do in the United States regularly. There's been some people who feel that maybe not accelerating a student jumping ahead can hurt them socially further on down the line. Say if you're a 15-year-old hanging out with 16-year-olds because they're driving, etc. But we can do a lot at the elementary school level of, maybe they stay with their classmates in third grade for activities, lunch, recess, but yet we can play around with the fact that if they're reading beyond a third grade level, that they can go up to fourth grade and read with the fourth graders. Or if they are doing really well in math, that we can accelerate them in math a year. So, notice how that 0.68 is a huge number. Comprehension programs, very strong. That reading within each subject area and really comprehending that reading. Concept mapping. Those graphic organizers are huge for student learning. But if you look above, we had a 0.12 for ability grouping and the tracking and the steaming. When you place students in a group in August and not move them around, they stay in that blue group from August till May, you can see how that does not affect anything as far as a student learning. Going down, cooperative learning versus individualistic, there's a time and a place for those, but the cooperative learning really does impact. That's a 0.59. That is strong growth over the course of 1 year. Direct instruction. Now, there was a time where we were told direct instruction, that's a negative. No, there is a time and a place for direct instruction. If we do that I do, we do, you do, that gradual release method where we have that direct instruction, and then through formative assessments, we pick up who's not getting it, who's getting it, ready to go on, that feedback, that's huge, but we have to have the direct instruction. Feedback is huge. Your feedback to students, the students' feedback to you. Look at that, 0.75. Gender, so here's a big thing, the 0.12. They've seen it just hasn't impacted students as much as they thought it would, that having an all-male and an all-female classes or schools. Home environment, we already know this. It does impact student learning, 0.52. But we always have to keep in mind, because there are strategies higher than a 0.52, we're able to overcome most of the time a home environment. Look at the jigsaw method, 1.2. That is almost 3 years. Well, it is 3 years worth of growth in 1 year. Please do a YouTube on it to take a look at it. Of course, right now, the reason we're recording this is because of safety issues and COVID. Jigsaw method is a method where the students are in cooperative grouping and jigsawing around the room. There are ways to still do this and keep it socially distanced. There's also ways to do this via online learning and jigsaw it. So there are ways that we can overcome the safety issues in place and still use this wonderful strategy. Impact or the peers, and most of that, I think going down, you're able to see that it really impacts that. I'm going to pause it 1 second because my colleague's going to join in here.
First of all, I just have to say as many times as I've heard Bridget present visible learning, I just get excited all over again. And I hope that you are taking it all in too, because I want to remind you that these are not just thoughts people have or, oh, that went really well. I feel really good about that. I'm sure it had an impact. No, these are research based findings. And I don't know about you, but that list, there were some surprises up there for me. So we have one more activity for you to do in this section. And I know that you're taking notes, and I want to emphasize again what she just said about Jigsaw. You can do that during this very challenging time. So I hope you'll look into that.
All right, here is the second sheet. So we're going to do the same thing here, looking through all of these topics. And again, mark high, medium, or low. Let me just see if I can explain anything here that might be unfamiliar. Providing formative evaluation to teachers from students. This is the student feedback to you as the teacher. Teacher clarity. That is very simply the teacher is telling the students at the front of class, this is what we're going to be working on. This is what you're going to accomplish by the end of class, and showing the students, this is my expectation for what needs to be turned in, or how you show me that you got today's lesson. Reducing class size, retention, I think all those other ones are really self-explanatory. So just take a few minutes. I'm going to go on to the next slide, and I will meet you there. All right, here we are. Take a look at these scores compared to what you chose. So that feedback from students to you, huge. Look at that, a 0.90. This is real feedback to you. And this is through formative assessments, which we're going to be talking a little further down on this training. But and it doesn't have to be tough, these formative assessments to you, but it has to be planned. That is the key here. Worked examples. It's just, I always go back to, if somebody gave you a recipe of something kind of intricate, but didn't give you a picture of what they wanted it to look like at the end, say some sort of decorative cake, and there's no picture there of final product, a worked example, the expectations are not going to be met. So you can see how showing and modeling, this is what I expect to have you present to me, the end product, anything like that, huge, 0.57. Teacher clarity, which we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, big, 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 0.75. Now let's take a look at those ones that don't, that low. Now I know this is a huge one, that reducing class size. And this is because most of the time, teachers don't change the way they teach. When they have 25, they teach the same way as if they have 11. Nothing really changes there. And so, you know, what Dr. Hattie found was it really didn't impact the learning in the classroom. Now, do we find it easier? Frankly, I found it easier to have a class size above 20 than the smaller class size, because I did a lot of cooperative learning, and it's tougher to do cooperative learning with a smaller group. But just know that it is not one of the biggest impacts. Let's take a look at retention. That was the one I told you about earlier. That's in the negative. Holding back students, we have really found to be a negative. Oh, I guess I had talked about moving around, but the retention has shown to be something that affects students as they grow along the school year. So really keep that one in mind. Student control over their learning. This is where a student says, you know what, I think I'd like to learn about frogs this year, and then does that. You know, it's not standard based. So the student control of their learning, we have seen, is not impactful. Let's go on student expectations. That is the student expecting a grade, like they can determine it. And this is also based on the teacher's expectations. You hold those expectations high, not too high, just high enough where it's a little bit of a challenge. And those students rise to that. But it's also the students' their expectations. Remember back in college, if you knew you had a test the next day and you had the opportunity to go to a party the night before, you knew on that test, I don't think I'm going to get an A, but I'm hoping for a C. That was your expectation. Students starting in about 4th grade really own their expectations. We got to give that to them while holding those expectations high. And you can see that's a huge impact on student learning. Teacher credibility. Here's the thing there. Students they know the credibility within 30 seconds of entering your classroom. If that classroom is full of papers stacked up, looks like the teacher is disorganized, that credibility goes down. It's just a what is. And many of you are brand new teachers. This is a learning year for you. So many things that you are learning if you are a new teacher. You're putting in your brain file or you're jotting it down. Next year, I'm not doing that. So just keep in mind that credibility, huge for the student. They will rise to those expectations that you have when they know you're credible. Teacher expectations, we've already gone over that. Now this is always a huge surprise. It's that subject matter knowledge. This is because most of the time when we're teaching, we're not going deep in subject levels. We are at the surface. We are teaching the standards and not going super deep. The key is the teaching. Looking at those students and seeing the impact of your teaching on their learning. That's the most important. So that subject matter, yes, of course it's important, but the actual teaching and getting the feedback from those students, are they getting it? And what are you doing to do the reteaching so they get it is the most important. Huge on student-teacher relationships, we know that. Gaming, it's a 0.33. Vocabulary programs, when they are embedded inside the subject area, huge. Those vocabulary programs that are kept separate, where we're just memorizing and writing down definitions and looking it up, that's not impactful. But vocabulary within the subject, huge. Whole language, we know, that was tried, didn't really work. And within class grouping, we've already talked about before as well. The in-class grouping works if it's constantly changing in that group. So anyways, I think you have a stronger idea of effect sizes and some of those strategies that are really working in the classroom. Okay, so if you ever look up John Hattie, which I hope you do, because I think you're going to get a lot out of it, visible learning, you'll see a graph that kind of looks like this. Now, this one's from 2018. I'm not sure he's updated 2020 yet, or even going into 2021, but they're constantly being refreshed. And actually, he might be, with COVID, coming around and some socially distanced things, really what's impacting. So this is what it looks like, and you can see collective teacher efficacy, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, which is #1 at this time. But you can see 252 influencers and effect sizes. So he's got a lot of strategies there. Check them out when you get a chance. Here is the collective teacher efficacy. What does that even mean? All right, so this is what it means. It's when, as a group, as a school, as a grade, as a subject area, we all believe in our students and those high expectations. Together, we can do this together. And that's a 1.57. It's when we all believe, doesn't matter what students you have in front of you, believe that those students can do it. When it's together as a collection, that's because those students can pick up on that. They know as they're going class to class to class to class, this school believes in me. They have high expectations, and I'm going to do it. That is the number one impact on student achievement right now. It is 3 times more impactful than socioeconomic status. So it doesn't matter what type of school you are in. If everyone believes we can overcome that socioeconomic status, if you look at it, 3 times more important or more impactful than the home environment, 3 times more important, excuse me, I guess it would be important and impactful as parental involvement. So you may be at a school where a parent, you can't get a hold of them, phone's always disconnected. That belief with your teammates can overcome that. And it's also 2 times more impactful than prior achievement. You know, those kids come to you, those are the ones we have to teach. It doesn't matter what it was prior. You hold those expectations high, not too high. If they were a level 2, they may not be a level 5, but we can get them to a 3. That you keep holding those expectations high. Now, I do want to talk about one thing here, and this is where you have to dig a little bit into John Hattie's work. You see at the bottom there's homework, 0.29. That does not look high at all because it's not near the 0.40. This is where you have to dig. This is why you can't just take that number and run with it, because that homework is K through 12. It's broken up, and it's different when it's broken up. We now know it's not impactful when it's in the primary grades. The number is low. Once we start to get into middle school, that number gets higher. And once we get into high school, the number is even higher. So don't take that 0.29 as the gospel. You got to dig further. And there are certain subjects where it's impacted even more, the homework. But we do know it's a low number in those lower grades. So just keep that in mind. So if you were teaching 11th grade, could be AP Physics, check it out yourself through John Hattie and find that effect size. Don't take that 0.29 as the end all be all there. This slide is part of the why. Some of this research is can be really time consuming to look up. It can be impractical in the classroom. It can be expensive. So we're going to concentrate really on this low hanging fruit. These are the things that we've kind of discussed a little bit that are truly something you can put into your classroom right away, works, and you'll start to see an impact on the student learning right away on that one. All right, we briefly talked a little bit about teacher clarity, and this one is one of the biggest things that you can do. It really is a simple idea if you think about it. It's at the beginning of class, and you can actually have it posted on your board. You are simply telling the students, this is what we're doing today. This is the learning, not really the doing that we're going to be doing, the activity. This is the learning that's going to be occurring. And by the end of this period, you will have learned this. And why? Why are they doing it? And you're also going to be sharing the success. What is it that will let you know the students got it? What is it that's going to let the student know they got the learning down? So it's a simple, it's inexpensive, it's practical, and it's going to be something that really, as you're designing your lesson plans, you're going to be thinking about that teacher clarity. Very clear. Here is what you're going to learn. Here's how you're going to know you learned it, because it's going to look like this. This is where that modeling of student work comes from, that you are showing them at the beginning, this is what success looks like. So everybody is very clear on those expectations. You've stated yours, the students get it, and then by the end of the class period, they have success as far as their learning. And it's also a formative assessment for you. You know what? I have to reteach this tomorrow because 30–40% of my students didn't get it. A little reteach, or 80, 90% of my students got it, we're ready to move on. And here is the effect size, 0.75. For something that doesn't cost any money, it's a huge impact. This would be one I would really target right now, the teacher clarity.
So we're trying to look at some specific standouts from visible learning. Unfortunately, they're not coming up in front of you, but I can tell you one of them is about accurate, specific, authentic teacher feedback. So very, very impactful. And so perhaps in your lesson plans, you may need to write yourself a little note. Always keep in mind, folks, yes, lesson plans are required, but they're actually for you. So write yourself little notes in there. Make sure that I address this with Bridget. Make sure that I address this with Sophia, and make sure that it is specific and oh so important in building your relationships. And you know this, it needs to be authentic. So don't blow smoke at them. Give them some real, accurate, authentic feedback. Another one of the standouts from the visible learning studies was the amount of teacher talk compared to student talk. I think there was a stat up there that said teachers ask somewhere between 400 and 500 questions a day, and students ask 3 or 4 a week. Again, in your lesson plans, maybe you write yourself a little note that says, stop being the sage on the stage. Or even better, perhaps in your lesson plans, you think of some of those higher order open-ended kinds of questions and you jot them in there just to kind of spur or to start the conversations. Don't try to think of them in the moment, at least not here at first. After you've taught for as long as Bridget and I have, they do tend to come, but at the beginning, you may need to write those specifically in your lesson plans. And that's okay, because the lesson plans are for you. And the last thing that was in those stats, and again, I apologize that they're not up there, but we'll try to figure that out before we put this online, is to evaluate the student's learning. Authentic assessment and being able then to decipher it and to use it to propel learning is an essential skill and so very impactful to students. And when I say decipher it and then use it to propel learning, that's one of those things that Bridget was talking about just a moment ago. They turned in an exit slip on the way out, and as you looked at them, glanced at them that night, not pored over them for hours, but glanced at them, it became evident that 90% of them got the concept. So now you know it's time to move on. But if the opposite is true, then of course you might need to be able to, you might need to reteach that concept. The other thing I'm going to say at this point in this training is, guys, you need to be patient with yourself. This takes planning and practice, and I need you to ask for help from your perhaps more experienced teammates, from your team leaders, and your mentors, yes, and be diligent. Don't say, I can't do this, this is too overwhelming. You can do it. It's not going to come just like that. It takes practice and persistence, but you can do it. So here's the official rubric from IPAS, again, Dimension 1. And I want to point out over here in the first column, under Mastery Learning, you have a 0.58. What that refers to is the effect size from visible learning that we've been talking about. So you can see that all those visible learning strategies that we were discussing, they are embedded here in our evaluation system. Likewise, under prior achievement, element number 2, it's a 0.67. And element number 3, unit goals, 0.56. I want you to take just a few moments and focus on the middle of this rubric, the proficient and the developing columns. We kind of have this preconceived notion that if there are 4 rankings, well, every teacher has to be over here at a 4. Actually, 3 is labeled proficient. That's awesome. Proficient means you are doing a proficient job. You are probably in that 40, the blue, whatever. I think the blue is almost 50% of teachers are doing things that have a positive effect size, and that is proficient. If you're a brand new teacher, perhaps you're over here in developing, but you're moving toward proficient. That should be your first goal. Now, sometimes we word these, and I think these are pretty self-explanatory, but you might, again, ask one of your experienced teammates, okay, but what does that look like if it says lesson plans are aligned to the district adopted curriculum maps, blah, what exactly does that look like? I think one of the mistakes we make sometimes as first year teachers is that we're afraid to ask. We don't want to look dumb. We don't want to look like we're not prepared. Any successful teacher is going to understand that you are fully prepared to be there, but there were things you had no idea you were going to have to deal with, especially in this day and time. So if you're having trouble figuring out what this rubric actually says, please don't be afraid to ask. So I feel like this is another one of those slides that is pretty self-explanatory. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about why do we do them. Well, perhaps most importantly, the reason that we create lesson plans is that we signed a contract that said that we would do just that. BFT and BPS entered into negotiations, and they said that the following items must be in our daily lesson plans. Targeted state adopted standards. Now, I know we have all been hearing about unit planning. It's always planned with the end in mind, and there are some definitely overreaching standards for each of those units. But daily standards, what are you going to focus on today? And later on we'll talk about some other things that are in there, but what am I going to focus on today? And put that verbiage in there. And one of the things that you might consider doing is then make yourself a few notes on, okay, how would students say this standard? Sometimes we use such educational ease that students are looking at our standards up on the board, because I know we all post them, but they're like, what? I'm not sure what that is. So as you list the daily standards in your lessons, which is a contractual agreement, then also make a few notes about how might a student say this. Number two, specific learning activities are contractually a requirement of your lesson plans. And specific learning activities, listen folks, it's not supposed to be a checklist where you just go off and say, okay, I did this, I did this. What learning activity are you having your students do so that they can master the standard that has been set for that class? It is not read pages 19 through 23 and then answer 6 questions. That is not a specific learning activity. That is a learning activity, or just an activity that you can check off. So be very careful with that one. It must be specific and it must address the standard.
Okay, so we are now at assessments. Those have to be in your lesson plans. And they don't have, it doesn't have to be anything that's extremely difficult to do, but it has to be pre-planned. And that's every day, because actually, if you think about it, you're making assessments all the time. You're asking questions, asking students, to give you an answer on something you just read, an activity. That's an assessment. That's your professional judgment assessing they got it or they didn't get it. The difference is it actually has to be in your lesson plan, because you have to pre-plan it. And sometimes when we just randomly ask some students questions to see if they got it, well, those 2-3 kids got it, but we don't know if the other 22 got it. So we really have to think ahead about our assessments. Those have to be in there, and we're going to break it down into formative and summative. This slide really goes back to what I just said before, when you're asking just a couple of kids questions and counting that as an assessment. We've seen that before in a class. The second you say or ask the question, who can tell me, everybody shuts it down. They're not going to answer. You might get the same 2 or 3 kids that answer that, but it's not an assessment. So keep that in mind. It just doesn't cut it. We really have to be able to assess all of our students. There are 2 different types of assessments. We have the formative and we have the summative. And both are very, very important. The summative actually is the end goal. You should have that summative, what you want to show mastery of those standards, at the very beginning of your planning. So if it's an exam, it's a project, it's an essay, you already know that summative, that end assessment before you even start planning the lessons. So that's the end goal, because that's what the kids are going to show you, that they got it. It's time to move on. I can take that information and apply it to the next thing that I'm going to be doing. So summative assessments are always designed at the beginning of the lesson planning, because that's the end goal. That's the end on a roadmap. That's the end. The formative assessments are those ones done daily. And those are exit slips. I gave a list here of quizzes, concept maps. Thumbs up, thumbs down is not a formative assessment. You know this, I know this. When we were kids, a thumbs up if you get it. You look around the classroom, oh yeah, thumbs up. That's not an assessment, because the kids just follow what everybody else is doing. It's an assessment. A formative assessment is something that you're taking that feedback. If it's an exit slip, you're asking one question, two questions where the kids talk about and write about what they learned, and you're taking that note, that sticky or whatever, and you're looking at it and you're like, got it, got it, got it, got it, didn't get it. I will have to reteach this group of kids tomorrow, just a quick reteach, make sure they got it, and then we move on. It also lets you know the whole class didn't get it, or 90%, 80%. We really are looking for 80% of that class getting it. Once that happens, then we can move on. But those formative assessments let you know that they're ready for the summative. No way should you get to a summative assessment and you're surprised. You should know through all of those formative assessments that you've been doing that those kids are ready for that summative. Going back to student expectations, when those kids do those formative assessments as well, they have their own expectation on how they're going to be doing on that summative. If they are nailing it, if they're acing those formatives, they know they're going to just do really well on that summative. So no summative assessment, that end test or anything should be a surprise to you. So those have to be listed in your lesson plans, and it can be as simple as exit slip with the question that you're going to be asking.
And before we move on to the last requirement in your lesson plans, just let me put in a word for those individual whiteboards. I think those are an excellent way to gather formative assessment data, and also an easy and quick way, and a very authentic way, I believe. So the fourth thing that must be in your lesson plans are the ESE and the ESOL accommodations. We put up there just once and inside the cover. Actually, you're going to need to check with your administration to see what they prefer. Now, I think in many general ed classrooms, inside the front cover is fine. Certainly, if you are in an ESE classroom, that's going to look a little bit different. You are going to have to specifically address how you are dealing with those students. But think about this. If you have those ESE and ESOL accommodations, there's some great information for you as you are planning your lessons. How are you going to address those folks? Because it is our job, and I believe our desire, that we want to serve every single student and give them the opportunity to be successful. So once again, and I've lost my cues up there, but I'll just remind you that it is a legal document. It is a contractual element of your evaluation. You do need to address the school culture and expectations. What we've talked about here are generally approved by most of the schools, but you do need to talk with your administrator about, are there additional wants you have in there? For example, if the administrator is being especially scrutinizing your lesson plans about higher order questioning, then it'd be a good idea to put some higher order questions in your lesson plan, though it is not one of those requirements. We all want to do a good job, and your administrator is saying, hey, listen, don't try to think of those on the spur of the moment. Also with the ESE accommodations and things. But the big thing I want to say here, folks, is those lesson plans are for you. They're for you. They are a guide. They are to keep you on focus. And I know we have said you have to have this, this, and this, and maybe you want to do this, this, and this. But just remember, don't make them so confining that you don't feel like you can enjoy the teaching experience, because that's what it is about. Yes, you want to be successful at the end of the day, but you want to know that you have addressed the needs of the students and that you are leading them towards a learning goal. So this is another one of those slides that is, I think, self-explanatory. But before you start reading it, I also want to say this. If at the end of the week, your lesson plans are pristine, you didn't use them. Because I'm going to tell you, no matter how good a planner you are, you cannot foresee things that are going to come up during the day. So jot yourself notes in there. This class got this far. Oh, we had a fire drill in the middle of this class, so I need to pick up back here. The lesson plans are for you. And here's something that I wish I'd thought of during my first years of teaching. If something works really well, put a big star by that. Put a marker in there or something so you know to use that activity or that sequence of events in the future. So research has proven that 75% of our students are extroverted learners and thinkers. They like to talk. And 25% are introverted thinkers, which means that they need some think time. They need to process just a little bit. Again, keeping that in mind as you're planning your lessons. I hate to keep harping on it, but that's where those higher order open-ended questions come in, and you write them in your plans so that you don't have to try to think of them in the moment. And let's also relate that to our present situation. We have hybrid classes, and so many teachers are telling me, you know, John, at the end of the day, I feel like I may have ignored my e-learners, or I may have spent too much time with only those kids, only those students who were in front of me. So again, writing yourself notes in your lesson plans. Hey, make sure I'm including the e-learners in our discussions, or make sure that I'm not just focusing on those 5 students in the back who need a little bit more guidance. Make sure that you are addressing all of those things and writing yourself little cues so that you can serve all of your students equitably.
All right, there are so many different ways that we can have students get involved, opportunities for them to work on different learning activities. So really take that time to plan for different activities for them. Like, and it's tough right now. I know with the learning strategies having to be socially distanced, it's online, we've got hybrid, we've got e-learning, but there are a lot of models out for that, as I mentioned earlier. Dig into those a little bit. You only need a few tricks. That's it. And you can do them over and over again because you're changing the actual learning going on. But doing a think pair, and if you have a class in front of you, you can do share with the whiteboard like John had brought up. You know, we're not exchanging papers anymore, but those think pair shares, those strategies are really important, but you have to think about them ahead of time and plan for them. So you want to have, you know, constantly be thinking about that. And this, again, is like the previous slide. We have to involve the students in the learning. They have to be engaged and active with it. That's how they remember. The listening to lectures, they're not going to remember it. Showing them, you know, they start to remember, but when they really get to take part in it, and this is part of the lesson planning, that is when it all starts to come together. So keep these things in mind when you're doing those lesson plans.
So as we move towards the conclusion of this online workshop, may I just say that if you follow the I do, we do, you do format, which is prevalent out there, then you are working towards the accomplishment of that learning experience that Bridget was just talking about. So what template do I use? Well, again, contractually, you are not being told what template to use. You use what works for you. I always used to put mine on line and printed them out. They have to include the standards, they have to include specific learning activities, they have to include assessments, and there has to be a place for accommodations. Once again, as Bridget takes over this part of the presentation, I just want to remind you that just because Bridget and John said it does not mean it is the gospel. You need to check with your school administrator, see what they say, and please don't say, well, John Hayes told me to do it this way, because he might say, well, I don't care. So make sure you check with them and find something that works for you, because if you've got nothing else out of this, we hope that you understand what lesson plans are for you and for your students, of course.
Okay, these next slides are just going to be some templates that you have options to use. Again, as you're going through it, keep in mind, like what John just said, it has to be the thing that works for you. One thing I do know not to use is that old green lesson plan book where we have those little squares, because you can't fit all the stuff in there. So just know, please don't use that. I know a lot of schools hand those out to, those things are from like 30 years ago when we just had to list a couple of things. It's different now. And so use something that works for you. It can be handwritten, it can be typed. You really do need to have though the lesson plans on your desk. A lot of times when an administrator comes in to do an observation or your evaluation, they want to see the lesson plans. And if you keep them all on the computer, it's hard for you to show your lesson plans to teacher, to the principal or AP while you're out teaching. The other thing that's difficult about having your lesson plans online, please do them online, but print them out, is if you're using your computer to do hybrid teaching, e-learning, it's hard to keep referring back to your lesson plans. If you're using your computer for the DocCam, it's hard to refer back to the lesson plans all the time. So by all means, put them online, but print them out and keep them in a binder, because that'll be the best one. So here's a template there for you to use. We're going to attach these templates. I'm going to tell you all of this. We're going to attach to this training. There's going to be another template that I'm not showing you right now, but we use a lot in the district. It's going to be one of the templates we attach, and one of the reasons I like it is because, well, we have two versions of it. We have a daily version and then we have a weekly version, because some of you do a weekly plan. You're doing a unit over a week, and so it breaks it down that way. But as you take a look at that template, you can print that out, handwrite into it, and I like it because it gives suggestions for those cooperative learning strategies. So you don't have to remember, okay, what's another one I could use? It does Bloom's taxonomy. It it has Webb's depth of knowledge in there. It has sentence starters for some Marzano questioning. It has the whole gradual release that John was talking about. The I do, the we do, the you do. It has a spot for the standard. It has a spot for the learning activities. So really check that one out, because we have a lot of teachers using that throughout the district. Yeah, really successfully. And it has higher order questions there. It's just, it has a lot of stems there to get the brain thinking while you're doing the lesson planning. So keep that one in mind. You don't have to fill them all in. You just use what you need to use. So it's the weekly and then there's a daily. So just know that there's that one. So we have this template. Now here's a template you can see of a teacher, she designed this one for her class, but you can see it's handwritten. You can see it's in a binder, nice and neat, super easy to get in. We have a lot of teachers, they really, it has to be organized for them. The organized lesson plan makes the organized class. And one thing that John and I are really trying to hammer home with you is, if those lesson plans are complete and you are feeling secure and confident, okay, this is what I'm working on today, this is the learning that's going to be happening in my classroom, there's your classroom management. You got the classroom management down because you know what's going on the entire time. You're not having to worry about, okay, what was I going to be doing next? What's going to be, because you got it down. You're ready for it. You've been thinking ahead. You're prepared. You've planned. Now it's the teaching. Now it's that assessment. Did the kids get it? So the strongest lesson plans make the strongest classroom management. Keep that in mind there. So there's that template. Here is one of those ones that has those little blocks, but it looks like this teacher is using it fairly appropriately, you know, and it's working for her. So just know if that is a book you started in, that green book we're handed out, that you can use it, but you have to use it differently. You really have to break it down to make sure you have all of those requirements in there. So it's still doable. Now, one we have, a lot of teachers use is Planbook EDU. We also have Planbook EDU. We have planbook.com, I believe. A lot of teachers are using this, and there's a lot of positives for using it online. Your school may have actually bought a license to use it. We have some schools that have, so all the teachers are using it, which is nice because most of those online platforms allow you to share your lesson plans with your colleagues, share it with admin. The admin can go in and see what you're doing. So, you know, we can take care of Dimension 1 when it comes to evaluation time, but I love the sharing part. And we're going to go a little bit more into Planbook EDU as an example of an online platform. All right, so these were just some benefits. I'm not going to read through all of them because I know you know how to read, but one of the things I do like about most of these platforms now, they keep track of the standards, and you can pull down and they give all the state standards, so you can see the ones you've already used, the ones that your students have already mastered, and you can pull those into place into your lesson plans, and it keeps track of, my students already mastered that, but we got to tackle this, but you still have to work on these standards. So there are a lot of positives, like I mentioned, the ability to share, the ability to shift. My kids didn't do well with this. The majority of my kids need a reteach, and then you're able to shift it over to the next day for a reteach. So check out some of these online platforms if you've not done so. And again, also check with admin and your colleagues if it's something your school's already bought the license for.
So again, Bridget and I want to thank you for joining us in this almost 1 hour presentation. We hope that you found it helpful. We also are well aware that we have shared a lot of information with you. And some of you, your heads may be spinning and saying, oh, okay, but I don't even actually know how to start. What does it actually look like for me to lesson plan? Well, we thought that might be a concern for some, and so the next link after this presentation is a link to some footage of a real-life teacher, real-life planning, and we hope that you will find it beneficial and helpful. Your assignment for this class, because we are awarding 3 hours credit, 1 hour watching this video, and you certainly may watch it as many times as you want to and need to. But in addition to that, we want 1 week's worth of lesson plans sent to myself, and that is Hays, H-A-Y-S, no E, only the Rich Hayses have an E, so I'm HAYS.JOHN at brevardschools.org. Once again, Hays.John@brevardschools.org. 1 week's worth of lesson plans, and I'd like to have them within 2 weeks of the start of you watching this video. As we close now, I want to reiterate something that Bridget said just a moment ago, and that is that a good lesson plan is the start to a great classroom management plan. So keep that in mind. And then finally, in closing, you know that I'm going to say lesson plans are for you.